now we'll have our hot blocks presentation with Chief Bo and Jamie Argueta.
Make sure I push the right button. All right. Well, hard presentation to follow. First of all, thank you for giving us a few moments tonight, Mayor, City Manager, those here and listening at home. Tonight, I'm probably going to give you a little glimpse into my mind and how I think about stuff, but also how I'm constantly tweaking within our police department to try to get results from the resources we have, maybe a little differently, looking at problems differently and thinking about problems a little bit differently. As you know, the guiding principles on the police department won't change. Fighting crime, building trust, and taking care of our people are the priorities of this agency, and they'll remain that. Tonight, I want to talk a lot about how do we fight crime and maybe some new ideas on how we can impact crime in a little bit different way that still complies with all of our ideologies in Burien about how we treat our community and how we do business, but also maybe we'll push the needle towards reducing crime in the city a little bit and really having a measurable way to own what we do in direct results of the results we get. So my clicker turned on. Oh, so this is very cool, you guys. This technology is fairly new to this desk. I'm very excited about this. So first thing I did was kind of take a little assessment on the Burien Police Department patrol. So we have 28 officers assigned to patrol in Burien. Those are the uniformed officers that get dispatched to calls. You call 911. They're the ones that are generally speaking going to be the ones coming 24 hours a day. There's a lot of talk about the number of resources and if we have enough and everything else. And instead of really focusing on the number of resources, I tried to focus on, could we use that resource a little bit different? There's 28 FTEs there, and could we think about a little differently, maybe how we could impact crime using those resources just a little bit different? Right now, what we do is we really look at hotspot-based policing, where we look at heat maps. So we kind of look at big areas in our community that we have a lot of calls for service, and we try to generally be in those areas. And while we do see some results from that, it's hard to measure, and it is somewhat random in nature. So an officer generally being in this 20-block area of downtown may impact crime, but it's really hard to measure the impact of that one officer doing that work. So I really want to look at how can we actually measure what we're doing and the impact the police department's having. I'm going to introduce the really smart guy next to me that actually told me how to do all this in a moment here. So one of the things I really looked at is an idea that comes out of some work they're doing in the Dallas Police Department. And the way they look at their crime plan is really breaking down the city into little tiny chunks, 1-block segments. And after looking at the whole city in 1-block segments, they use crime analysts and data to try to say, where's it most likely we can impact crime by being physically present right now? Where putting an officer might actually change the metric. And ultimately, if you think about it like this, somebody walking down the road typically needs to have an opportunity, availability, and desire to commit a crime. So they're walking down the road, they see a car, the doors are unlocked, they open the door and take the purse and walk down the road. The idea is if there's an officer sitting in that block at that moment in time, that crime doesn't happen. It doesn't just displace somewhere else, it just doesn't happen. That crime occurred because you had the crime triangle all met where the opportunity, desire, and location were there. So really it's about how do we become a guardian to that area in a limited scope using the patrol resources we already have. And I think this in a lot of ways, it really helps to supplement like the work we do with our storefront officer downtown, which really kind of is based on this model as well, but really spreading it out on a broader scale across the city. So does it work? At the end of the day, what we know is when we studied this work, when we studied the project, Dallas Police, 7% drop in crime just by having an officer sitting in a location for a few minutes a day, being in the right spot for just a couple minutes a day. When people see them, you can impact the crime if you can let the analysts drive where the officers are and when they're there. So let the science control where the officers go, not necessarily waiting for a 911 call, but rather trying to be there before the 911 call happens. So try to actually prevent the crime from occurring in the first place. There's been a ton of study on this, and Jamie will talk about the study a little bit, but fundamentally what we see is about 80% of these studies have shown a direct correspondence between using analyst-driven police in the right location, right crime, reducing crime between 6 and 90%, depending on the study location and amount of resources dedicated to it. No, I'm not guaranteeing 90% reduction in crime before anybody asks. Want to set some expectations here. So here's the model we kind of came up with, this idea of doing hot blocks. So having the city broke down into 1 block segments, and then using all the fancy math that Jamie does to identify which blocks are most likely to have an impact on crime by having an officer sitting there. And then what we do is we create a recurring call for service in the CAD system that dispatches an officer to that location every 90 minutes. The officer's only going to sit there for 12 minutes. They're going to sit there with their lights on, making it perfectly clear there's an officer at that location, highly visible, for 12 minutes. And then the officer's going to leave. And 90 minutes later, an officer's going to come back to that same location. They're going to put their lights on, and they're going to do that throughout the key hours of the day, which statistically are from 10 a.m. until 7 p.m. So looking at that, we can continually have officers in location. And what we find is it not only impacts during that 12 minutes, but as long as it's frequent enough, people get used to seeing an officer in that location, and it starts to impact the time around that 12 minutes until eventually the entire 90-minute window, people are less willing to commit a crime in that particular block, knowing that the police are regularly actively paying attention to that location. So that's the idea behind it and the psychology behind it. I'm conscious that we have limited resources. I am conscious that we aren't going to be able to make every single time get there right on the 90-minute mark. And it probably actually benefits to having some randomness to it anyway. I obviously looked at the Dallas model where they have 50 analysts working on the project and 200 cops that have no responsibilities other than this plan. But I think this is reasonable within our resources to say we can have an officer swing by for 12 minutes and turn their lights on. And we have a commitment within the department that everybody, from myself included, if you have a car with lights, is going to go sit at these locations when they hit on the screen and go sit there for 12 minutes. So it could be a detective sitting there, it could be a patrol officer, it could be the storefront officer, but we're all going to commit to doing the time on these locations. And we look at 3 locations as the locations that we're going to work on every month. And then everything else becomes a control. So we can see whether or not we impact those 3 locations relevant to the other locations that we don't have the resources to work during that month. And then we'll adjust the locations every month. And a couple other things I just put on here. I should read my notes. New location every month, and then we'll eval and adjust after about 90 days. So we're going to do it commit to it for 90 days, exactly the way it's written up with no changes. After 90 days, we're going to adjust whatever we have to adjust. And then at 6 months, we'll do a report out to council on what the results were. So we'll actually see if the science works. If it doesn't work, we've lost not that much. If it does work, there's a good opportunity here to actually start impacting crime in our community in a positive sense and really telling the story about how we're using our resources to directly impact crime in our community. So the last thing is part of the brilliance of the gentleman next to me. This is what's called an officer dashboard. So every officer will have up to the second information in their car that is auto updating, telling them not only what locations are the locations they're assigned to, but also giving them instant access to what time are we getting calls, what type of calls, what kind of crimes are occurring at that location. And on the right, I didn't populate it because I didn't want to give you guys all the data here for a council meeting, but it also will give you every call for service with instant links to them. So the officer can link to every single call for service at that location in the preceding 24 or 72 hours and see every case that's coming out, who the suspects are, what type of crime. So they can do their own research and really focus on doing some investigative research as well as some prevention. And in the top left-hand corner there's a little green arrow that gives you up to the second impact on crime. So is the crime going up? Is it going down? What percentage is it going down? What kind of results are we getting from this? So the officers can see in real time if they're having the impact on that location. And with that, I know nothing of any of the technical side of this. I read all the really pretty studies that said, find you a Jamie and ask him to come to the meeting to answer any further questions. And we are available for any questions.
Any questions for the chief? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you both for being here. When I went on my recent ride along, we sort of did something similar to this, but could you describe how this enhances sort of the tactics that are already in place? So for example, the officer would respond to one of the priority calls, but then we would go into the driving of the route that was determined to be important to go down, which streets. So what's being done now that's different than this, and how does it enhance it any differently?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take, first of all, I'm gonna take a little side detour here. So we're doing a ton of work within the Burien Crime Reduction Unit. The detectives that are doing a lot of the collective work in the city. Our set unit, I'm publishing case after case of fentanyl introduction work that they're doing. They're doing some great work. Our storefront officer, I think most people think walks on water here in the downtown area. These are things that aren't going to change at all. We're going to continue all of that. Patrol officers are continue to do regular patrol work just like they always would. The difference is they're going to get dispatched to an additional call. So the giveaway on this is sometimes when you're waiting for an officer to respond to your call, there is going to be a delay because they're going to prioritize trying to have the biggest impact right now at this moment in time where we think crime is going to happen. So there might be a 12-minute delay that you're not used to when you're waiting for an officer. That would never affect a priority call. So if you call because you're in danger, that's going to be prioritized over this work. If you call because you had something stolen out of your car yesterday afternoon, you need to file a report, that's going to get prioritized behind this work. So there will be a longer response time for some property crimes and what we would call a cold crime or a case report. That's the giveaway. Nothing else is going to change with their work. And basically what Jamie's told me is that the best time to be doing this is during a finite window of time for start. So you're still going to find your graveyard and late swing officers are doing traditional police work just like they always would. This is really just going to impact that time when we're trying to have the first impact.
Thank you.
Did I answer that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Councilmember Moore and then Councilmember Sarah.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to say I really appreciate the innovative approach here to actively preventing crime before it happens. Obviously, the time it takes to sit there and prevent a crime that would happen is a lot less than dealing with the crime after the fact. So I just wanted to state that I appreciate this, and I think it's really great that we're exploring new ways to handle things with our limited resources. I know in other places, police drive around in bright yellow vehicles because visibility helps prevent things. So looking to what works elsewhere and applying it here is a wonderful way to improve safety here. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sarah.
Thank you so much for reporting on this. It's really interesting and I can't wait to see the results. I did have a question for the locations where so there's going to be a car somewhere on a block with its lights going for 12 minutes every 90 minutes. Is there going to be a perception during the process of this that crime has gone up? Because like I always see the police in front of that house with their lights on. What's up with that house? Or is that something to worry about? Or is it not something that has been an issue?
The answer is yes. It's a big part of why I wanted to talk to y'all before we did this, because I figured you guys would be getting calls about why are the police sitting in my neighborhood with their lights on every day, repeatedly. Really, at the end of the day, what we want people to know is that we are doing this. We want them talking about it and talking about it in the lens of, the community thinks this is important, that we don't allow crime in this block, and we're going to focus on that. And I think if we all speak about it in that lens as a crime prevention technique, and that we collectively believe in this work, I think that helps us to alienate some of the arguments around we're not safe. I do know that Metro Transit has been an amazing partner in some of the work down there. And I don't know if people have noticed, they regularly have police officers sitting there with their lights on now. And they're doing, it's a different version, but they certainly are of the ideology that having a police officer, security officer with lights on regularly is also impactful in that work. It has nothing to do with crime. It just has to do with preventing crime and making people feel safer on the complex.
Could I follow up on, because of that answer, are we doing a lot to get the word out about this?
Starting here, yeah, it'll be on social media. There shouldn't be a secret about it. I don't believe that there's any secret about doing this work. I think there's media and other people in the audience that will also report out on this post haste. I think that's a good thing. I think people should know that we're focused on trying to push the needle on crime and being actively engaged in both prevention and response.
Councilmember Garcia.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Yes. And Jamie, thanks for making the time. Couple of questions, depending on the answers, I may have follow-ups, but I'll wait for other council members. One is, Is Jamie currently staff with the city of Burien, or is he with KCSO or consulting work? I'd love to make sure that we can continue to support this type of innovative approach to things. So knowing how we have a valuable resource of Jamie's services and skill set will help me to determine future budgets, how to make sure that we can support this type of work if it's impactful. So that's one question.
Thank you for the question. Oh, let me bring this forward. Better. Okay, so I am a crime analyst with KCSO currently. Yes, so I'll be available for any future projects and any follow-ups, and hopefully determining the impact of this. I would definitely love to continue this work.
So as a worker for the sheriff's office, do you also do this for all the other contract cities at the county?
The plan would be to eventually expand there, but as of right now, we are focused on Burien solely, and that is my sole priority right now.
Love that. Okay, thank you for that. Follow-up question is, looking at the results from Dallas and the data numbers that you're looking at, is there any indication as to how far away potentially from the hotspot blocks movement of crime activity may move to, because we are trying to deter and avoid, but that the sense at the end of the day is it may create other hotspots in other parts and other blocks of the city. So is there any data to show how far away or how close the movement of activity may move?
Yeah, so this is always a really interesting question that gets brought up a lot. And it's really fascinating because I love the science behind this, is that typically what you see is that when you have an officer on a block and they do this type of activity where they're patrolling the hot block and they're having the lights on and they're engaging with the community, what actually happens is a diffusion of responsibility. So other people at nearby blocks, 1 block away or even up to 4 blocks away, actually start recognizing what's going on in that block and decide not to take part in crime because they see that there's a guardian nearby. They see that these targets are protected and that there's no opportunity to do so. As far as diffusion, it is highly unlikely that diffusion will happen. There have been numerous meta-analyses done, and in addition to these meta-analyses about hotspots, about whether or not police departments do find displacement or not. And more often than not, they don't. And about, I want to say, more than 100 studies, only 27% of them have actually found displacement, but it was less than a block away, and it was a very minor crime, so like property crimes.
Deputy Mayor.
Just really quick, because you obviously know what you're talking about, but you weren't really introduced. Could you tell us who you are and what your what your qualifications are and where you're coming from? Because like you obviously know what you're talking about, and that's awesome and wonderful. But like, who are you?
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Jamie Argueta. I am currently a PhD candidate for the University of Cincinnati. I'm finishing up here and hope to defend. I've worked with policy institutes back at University of Cincinnati and published a couple studies just about crime in general and gentrification. And I've been with KCSO for about 2 years.
Are you all but dissertation? Is that just
Yes.
where you're kind of at? Congratulations.
Thank you.
Soon to be doctor.
Yes,
Congrats.
soon, hopefully.
Other questions? Well, thank you so much for that presentation and all the work you're doing.
Thank you.